Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. Today my wife gave birth to a child and my marriage died. Well, I'm 90% sure he's dead, but I'll get confirmation in a few hours. It usually takes longer, but due to the circumstances, the hospital rushed the DNA test. Of course, I'm sure it won't change anything. My phone bursts on the table when I'm sitting in a bar, 10 minutes from the hospital. I keep looking at the screen, even though I know the doctor won't call me for at least a few more hours. The calls I ignore are from my wife, children, and relatives. I'm sure they all want to know what the hell is going on, but if anything, so do I. The child is absolutely beautiful, with blonde curls like her mother's. She was born weighing 3.52 kilograms and 48.3 centimeters long. An ideal full-fledged baby. Except according to my wife, she was at least 6 weeks premature. Of course, I don't have a medical degree, but I'm also not a half-wit. A child born so early would not look so perfect in its development and coloring. My wife lied to me big time, and now that I've taken off the blinders of absolute love, I know that my biggest fear has come true. The child she tried to pass off as mine is actually the offspring of my late best friend. The waitress leaves me a 5th serving of Jack Daniels. At this rate, I'll spend $150 on a bottle that sells for $25. I just don't care. I'm falling into a coma again. The 3 Amigos were a lifetime ago, literally, in Gary's case. He, Tracy, and I have been inseparable since our families moved to the same block for 2 years when we were 5 years old. Gary's family and my family moved into the same house in the summer, and Tracy's family moved in the following spring. By that time, Gary and I had already become close, but Tracy fit into our family without any problems, because at that time she was a complete tomboy. She ran faster than me and was stronger than Gary, and there wasn't a single sport or game we played without her. When the other girls in the neighborhood were playing with dolls, Tracy would play kickball or stickball with Gary, me and the other guys in the neighborhood, and wouldn't give in to them. Everything changed somewhat when we became teenagers. Tracy, in particular, has changed from a physical point of view. From a skinny blonde with long pigtails, she turned into a young lady with growing breasts, slender booty and legs, and flowing silky hair. Gary and I both noticed the changes, but we never talked about it out loud for fear that Tracy would trample us into the mud. Although a year later we were still inseparable, I no longer objected to the rare occasions when Gary was not around, for one reason or another. At such moments, Tracy and I seemed closer, both physically and mentally, and in fact, I kissed for the first time one summer Sunday afternoon when Gary was somewhere with his family, and Tracy and I were sitting together on my porch swing. I don't even remember what we were talking about, but suddenly she leaned over and kissed me softly on the lips. Her lips were full and soft and tasted like the strawberry chapstick she used all the time, and my brain suddenly made a very good imitation of a TV that lost reception and went completely into the snow. "Wow," I whispered, completely unable to say anything else. Tracy blushed when we closed our eyes. I reached out with my left hand, took her right hand in mine, and we just sat together and rocked. Gary came back to us the next day, and if I hadn't participated in the kiss the day before, I would never have believed that it took place. Tracy returned to her usual reserved demeanor, without the slightest hint that something else had happened. At one point during the day, I even tried to take her hand in mine, but she very calmly pulled away. I was, to put it mildly, puzzled. The Christmas dance in my freshman year was approaching, and I thought it was the perfect time to make an official move on Tracy. She, Gary, and I were walking home from school when I swallowed hard twice and then asked, "Trace, if you're not doing anything next month, would you like to go to the Christmas dance with me?" Tracy, who was standing between Gary and me as we walked, stopped, which made both Gary and me stop. I noticed that Gary had a smirk on his face when we stopped. I'm already going with Gary. He asked me yesterday, Bobby." Tracy looked awkward. Gary was grinning, and I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. "I'm sorry, Bobby. You overslept, you lost," Gary snorted. I felt stupid. Firstly, I had no idea that Gary had any thoughts about Tracy, and secondly, because it's one of those unwritten codes. Don't mess with someone else's girlfriend, even if I just found out about it. "Hey, Gar, I didn't mean anything by asking. I didn't know, buddy." "I get it, Bobby. We're fine," he said cheerfully. Tracy fidgeted and looked awkward the rest of the way home. He and Gary were making small talk, and I was silent. I didn't ask anyone else to dance, and I didn't become a deer. Yes, I felt betrayed by both of my best friends. My father saw me moping around the house on the night of the dance, and he knew the reason for it. My parents were in our family room watching TV, and I was in my bedroom listening to music on a CD player, when there was a soft knock on the door and my father stuck his head in. "Girls, right?" he said, coming in and sitting in the chair behind my desk. "You can't live with them, but you can't kill them either." I shook my head to clear the cobwebs. I looked at him as if he had just stepped off the moon. He smiled wryly, a grin I knew so well. "Thanks, Dad. We had a good talk," I said. After the Christmas dance, 3 amigos turned into 2 amigos and their friend, and nothing more was said between us. We were still studying together, but Tracy and Gary were now an official couple. They remained that way throughout high school. Eventually, I started dating other girls. Finally, the 2 amigos split up in college. Tracy went to Michigan State, and Gary went to the University of California. I also enrolled at Michigan State, but because of my own male code, I barely spoke to Tracy in my freshman year. She seemed puzzled by this development, but I didn't want anyone to accuse me of trying to take her away from Gary. Tracy's mom actually came up to me one day and asked if I was mad at her daughter. Rhonda and Mark Ford were almost like parents to me, and I respected them as much as I respected my own parents. "She misses the old days, Bobby," Mrs. F told me. "It will never be like this again, Mrs. F. We are no longer 7 years old. And besides, if she's not dating me, then I can't imagine anyone better than Gary," I replied. The situation did not change in the second year, but at the end of the first year, Tracy invited me to be her companion at the official evening of her fraternity. I was surprised and wary. "Tracy, aren't you still dating Gary?" I asked. "I really don't want to come between you." "Gary and I broke up after the summer," she said. "He told me he was going to stay in California after graduation to study law, and he didn't want to keep me for another 3 years. "Law school? Gary? I never imagined this," I said. Our first date was, at best, tentative. She asked if I would consider asking her out on a second date. On the second date we kissed, and on the 4th we made love. I noted to myself that she wasn't a virgin, but if she wasn't paying attention, then neither was I. We dated for the next 2 years before we got married. Although I was against it, Gary was my best man. It was a little uncomfortable for both of us. I mean, having a guy as your best man who has previously dated and used the woman you're marrying is not exactly standard operating procedure. Gary returned to California right after the wedding, and I haven't thought about him in over 20 years. Our daughter, Kaylee, was born 2 years after the wedding. Our son, Jeffrey, appeared 2 years later. We learned from my mom that Gary rarely comes home. Our parents still lived on the same block, and Mrs. Prescott told my mom that Gary had come home to say goodbye. He had cancer and had less than a year to live, so he wanted to see his parents while he was still in good physical shape. My mom asked his mom if it was possible to arrange a meeting so he could see his old friends and other relatives. His mom thought it was a great idea. Gary was in the early stages of treatment and still looked pretty good, although it was obvious that he was incredibly depressed. He was single, divorced twice, and had no children. He, Tracy, and I probably spent at least 6 hours talking about life, his life in particular, and how it would end. Towards the end of the night, Tracy came up with an idea that ultimately ruined our marriage. "How about we come and take care of you until it's time for you to go to hospice?" Tracy asked Gary. Gary and I were shocked by what Tracy suggested. It wasn't something we talked about, and at first glance, I wasn't sure how we were even going to be able to pull it off. "He's our oldest friend, Bobby. Who else should do this? But the doctors say I may have a few months before I need hospice care," Gary said. "Of course, you guys can't quit your job and sit with me. You're paying for 2 kids in college right now. I work for a national insurance company that loves family vacations very much," Tracy explained. "Bobby can use his vacation and get some personal time." "That could be about 2 months of total time, dear," I said. "It's not enough." "Well, you can take a week at a time and stretch it out to 4 months. The rest of the time I'll manage on my own." I didn't like where it was going. I knew Gary was an old friend of ours, but my wife had just volunteered to spend a few months away from me and our house to take care of him. And since she did it right in front of him, it meant that I would have to look like the biggest bad guy in the world to turn down her offer. And yet, "Tracy, this is a bold commitment," I started to say, but she shot me a sarcastic look, interrupting. "Then it's settled. That's what we're going to do. I swallowed hard and bit my tongue. That night, I barely got through the door before I exploded. What the hell, Tracy? Are you going to leave me for 6 months or so to play babysitter with an old boyfriend? You selfish bastard! She screamed at me. Is that what this is about? You can't forget that he slept with me before you. That night, I slept in Jeffrey's old bedroom. It took us 3 days to come to some kind of agreement to help Gary, which translated into the language of the couple means that Tracy got her way, and we did everything exactly as she promised Gary. Gary was humble and grateful. I can't even guess how many times he thanked Tracy and me. I must admit that after the first month, I felt like a bit of a selfish jerk. I also have to admit that after the first month, I was tired of working, taking care of the house and helping Tracy take care of Gary, who had both good and bad days. Maybe it was because I was tired, but by the second month, I felt that something was wrong between me and Tracy. I knew she had to get tired of everything she did for Gary, more than I thought necessary sometimes, so I didn't spend too much time worrying about it. I was more worried about the looks Tracy and Gary exchanged slyly several times while I was there, as if they had their own special language. In the next 2 months, everything went downhill. Several times it seemed to me that I was imposing my presence on them. I was also somewhat surprised that Tracy seemed a little restrained in our bedtime relationships. After a week apart, I was ready to lash out at her when I met her, but she seemed almost bored. Again, I put it down to mental and physical fatigue. 4 months later, I ran out of days, and although Gary's condition worsened, I knew he still had some good time left. Tracy will have to pull the load alone, and I will have to accept that I will be alone for a month or more. After my vacation ended, our daughter Kaylee joined the work to help, which I thought was great since Gary was her godfather. She spent 2 separate weeks helping her mom. About a month later, Gary had to go to hospice, and a month later, he was gone. I flew back to California for the funeral. Tracy was just as inconsolable as Gary's parents. Both of his parents thanked Tracy and me endlessly for helping Gary. I declined most of the thanks towards my wife. The first week after returning home, Tracy behaved almost aloof towards me, which I attributed to grief. Then it was like a switch was flipped, and for the next 3 weeks we made love every day. I felt like a child again. A month after we returned home, I experienced the shock of my life when Tracy came out of our bathroom with a positive pregnancy test. Thinking back on it, I should have been shocked that she didn't look shocked herself, but I was too busy trying to stay on my feet after her statement. Tracy and I were 45, our kids were 22 and 20, and wait, didn't she take pills? I'm sorry, baby, but I forgot to take the pills with me to California, and when I got out of the habit of taking them, I didn't think about it when I returned home. You know that none of us believe in abortion. We can do it again, you and me. I heard myself agreeing with her from somewhere inside my head. Holy shit, I'm going to be a father again. I walked around with a stupid grin on my face for about a week. It didn't hurt that, as with previous pregnancies, Tracy's libido was elevated, and we made love every night, sometimes twice a night. It was almost too much, almost. When my daughter came home for the long weekend, she and Tracy went out for the whole day shopping for maternity and baby products. We had long ago thrown away and distributed everything that was from our previous children. The girls came home happy and joking, and I probably took a dozen bags out of the car. The girls quickly cooked dinner, and we all laughed as Tracy told us her random thoughts about the difference between what she buys today and what was available a couple decades ago. She also noted that she does not feel completely comfortable in the maternity clothes she buys because they were all made for women 10, 20 years younger than her, and made her feel a little out of place. Well, Mom, there's nothing you can do if you're a MILF and someone took it literally, Kaylee laughed. I saw Tracy quickly frown as she pondered her comment. It didn't escape me that Kaylee said someone instead of Dad. It wasn't a casual comment, and my stomach rumbled. I remembered my feelings of discomfort when I went to California to help Gary. I kept my thoughts to myself, but I kept my eyes open for the rest of the weekend. I heard a few more comments that I knew had 2 meanings, and I wondered if those comments were directed at me or my wife. One day, when Tracy wasn't in the room, I subtly tried to figure it out by asking Kaylee how she feels when she becomes a sister again after all these years. I knew she was thinking hard about how to answer her. Her eyes looked anywhere but at me for about 30 seconds, then a giggle escaped her lips before she could cover it with a fake cough. I think it's great that Mom is such a beautiful woman and that you are such a stud. She looked awkward and found a reason to leave the room quickly. I took 2 more Rolade pills from the pack I started carrying around with me during the last week. Tracy was getting bigger and, in my opinion, more beautiful every week, despite my constant feeling of anxiety. I just couldn't figure out what was going on. Or maybe I just didn't want to figure out what was going on. A few months later, I was in the office when I suddenly got a call from Tracy, who had taken an unpaid leave of absence, returning to work for only 3 months. "Hi, Dad. How about giving the girl a ride to the hospital today?" "What is it?" she asked in a sultry voice. Since, as far as I knew, Tracy was only about 6.5 months old, and the tone of her voice was incredibly beautiful, I didn't understand what she was asking me. "Why the hospital, dear?" "Is something wrong?" I asked, with more than a little concern in my voice. "Well, baby, my water broke and I'm just too lazy to go to the hospital," she purred. Oh, shit. That's all I could answer. I grabbed my car keys, jumped into the boss's office to tell him my news, and ran to my car. I live 15 minutes away from the office, but that day I got there in 12 minutes. I kept thinking that Tracy was terribly unperturbed, considering that her term was only 6.5 months. I knew that premature birth does not have the best effect on the child's health. I couldn't believe how calm Tracy was when I got home, but it was probably the birth of the other 2 children that gave her such confidence. I was even more nervous than with the first 2 children. 10 hours later, I was the father of a beautiful, perfect second daughter. Except that I wasn't. The nausea in my stomach can't even explain how bad I suddenly felt. After the nurse took the baby to wash her, she started handing her to me, but I instinctively jumped back, much to the nurse's shock. "This is a full-fledged child, isn't it, Doc?" I asked, no more than a whisper. She looked at me, then at Tracy, who was still being cleaned by another nurse. They exchanged meaningful glances. Then I saw Tracy shake her head almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Marsley, but I don't have permission to discuss the child's health with you. You are not on the privacy list. This is HIPAA, Act on the Transfer and Protection of Data Healthcare Institutions, TRANS," she replied. I'm not proud of myself, but at that moment I lost my temper. "To hell with HIPAA!" I shouted as she and all the nurses in the delivery room jumped back. "If this is my child, I have every right to ask about her health. And if he is not mine and you know this, then you cannot legally write my name on the birth certificate without my permission. And you don't have it. Now bring me that goddamned DNA test." It was deadly quiet when I turned on my heel and walked out of the delivery room, throwing off my maternity clothes as I went. As I was leaving the hospital, I caught a glimpse of my parents and Tracy's parents in the delivery room. I stayed at the bar to drink glasses number 6 and 7 and ate a hamburger. By this point, almost everyone who was someone in my life had called me, except for the doctor with the DNA test results. I guess that Tracy didn't want to waste anyone's time because at the moment, everything was practically resolved. Oh shit, probably 7 shots of Jack and a ton of stress, more important than the fact that your wife gave birth to someone else's child, because that night I slept like a log. My voicemail and message boxes were completely full. Assuming nothing happened after I left, I was supposed to bring Tracy and the baby home today. I took a shower and went to the hospital, feeling like someone was beating the shit out of my head and stomach from the inside. Tracy was breastfeeding her baby when I came to her room. I went in and sat down on a chair by her bed without saying a word. The baby was dozing, so Tracy took her away and put her in the cradle by the bed. "I don't even know where to start, Bobby," Tracy said softly as her eyes began to fill with tears. "This shouldn't have happened. I went there to help him and be his friend, honestly. But then he had a few bad days in a row, and at one point he cried in my arms, and then we were in bed and everything was fine as before. And as soon as it happened once, it was so easy to keep going, except when you came to help. Then you and I slept together again, and it was awkward, and I felt guilty. But I didn't know how to stop. Or maybe I didn't want it to stop. We've been sleeping together for 4 months, the last 2 non-stop when you weren't around. But honestly, you and I made love when I wasn't on the pill, and you could just as easily get me pregnant. Only it wasn't like that." She kept her eyes on the child as she told me her story. I was slowly absorbing it for now. "Wait, did you make love to Gary while Kaylee was visiting?" I asked in a daze. Tracy blushed crimson, and it took all my self-control not to strangle her. "She knew and didn't say a word to me," I exclaimed, completely disappointed. "Tell me that you at least threatened her or bribed her in some way. This can't be happening. Did Jeffrey know too?" What about our parents? Does the whole fucking world know that I'm a goddamned cuckold? Tracy's eyes widened and tears slowly rolled out of her eyes. I know my daughter, Bobby. I just knew she would understand, so we never tried to hide it from her. Yes, I asked her not to tell anyone. I told her it was on my conscience, Tracy said. No, Jeffrey didn't know and still doesn't know. No one knows except you, me, and Kaylee. I want it to stay that way too, so that we can do what's right for Bobby Geraldine. I know she's not technically yours, but now she's yours, and we have to be the same parents to her as Kaylee and Jeffrey. We are her parents. Point. The end of the story. We're doing this for her, and in honor of our best friend. Your best friend? I asked. I obviously wasn't his best friend, otherwise he couldn't have slept with my wife. You can't do that to your best friend. He was dying, Bobby. Moreover, he and I had made love before. Yes, but you didn't have a bed with him while you were married to me, unless there's something else you're telling me. Her blue eyes were almost glowing with anger. No, no! Bobby Geraldine? Really? Is that supposed to soften me up? What's her last name? Bobby Geraldine Martin. That's my last name too, remember? But on the birth certificate, she is listed as Gary's daughter, although no one except you and me should see this document if you still intend not to be listed as her father. Oh yes, I croaked. Why, Bobby? He was our best friend. He's gone. I gave him comfort and love in his last days. Is that so bad? You sound so sympathetic. But you were a married woman. You've crossed the line in your compassion. You didn't ask me before you broke your vows, violated our trust, and disrespected me. Yes, I understand that this is your body and you don't belong to me. But we made a vow of loyalty before God and our families. At least we should have discussed it first. Our vows were not made in a vacuum, and there's no way in the world I'm going to raise a child that another man has made up with my cheating wife. It's Gary's baby, Tracy whined. Would you think about her upbringing if Gary died and she was left alone? No, I wouldn't think so, but I never agreed to raise his beloved child with you, I said sadly. You know I love you, Bobby. I don't want to lose you and what we have because of this. Mistakes, I said, completing her sentence. No, I wasn't going to say that, she replied. Okay, maybe it wasn't the best decision I've ever made, but I'm not going to call it a mistake. The mistake is that we didn't discuss it first, and that's on my conscience. We didn't discuss this at first because you knew I would never agree to you sleeping with Gary, let alone having a baby with him, I growled. And if it wasn't for the fact that you got knocked up, you probably would never have told me about the affair. Despite how you say it all started, you made a strong-willed decision to keep doing it, and you even did it in front of our daughter. I know how to spell humiliation, and it's B-O-B-B-I. Thank you very much. Kaylee and Jeffrey both came home from college the following weekend to see their new brother or sister. I was at best cool to my daughter when she came into the house, and she looked guilty. That evening, Kaylee and I cooked dinner together after she and Jeffrey discussed the baby for about an hour. She never looked at me directly the whole time we were maneuvering around the kitchen, and everything was pretty quiet. After the meal, Jeffrey cleared away the dishes, and I took Kaylee by the hand and led her out to the backyard so we could talk in private. We barely had time to sit down on a couple of chairs before I let her speak. You knew she was cheating on me and you didn't say a word, I hissed. Kaylee jumped back from my outburst and her eyes started to water. She looked down, started talking, and then finally looked at my exhausted face. I thought it was great what you and Mom were doing for Uncle Gary. And when Mom did what she did, well, I was a little shocked at first, but when I thought about it, I started to look at it as courage, sadness, compassion, love, and tragedy. It was almost like Shakespeare. I didn't even think about the fact that she might get pregnant. I thought he was too sick for that. Plus, I assumed she was taking birth control. A compassionate friend or a liar? I guess these are my options, I spat at her while she was crying. Eat shit, Bill Shakespeare. What about the tragedy that my marriage has become? Have you given any thought to the good old dad? Of course not. The children returned to college on Sunday afternoon. After that, the three of us stayed together, and the house was damn quiet. Several times over the next few days, Tracy tried to ask me to help with the baby, even just to hold her for a few minutes. I refused every time, much to her disappointment. You're going to play 5-year-old with me, she yelled at me once when she asked me to hold the baby for a minute for some reason. Grow up, put on your big boy pants. In all the years we've been together, Tracy probably hasn't used a swear word against me more than a few times. I knew she was angry, but that wasn't my problem. I looked at her like a zombie and silently left the room. Work was my consolation. I could be away from home for 40 hours a week. When I was at home, I was often alone. I had a lot to work on. I realized that I shouldn't punish the child. It wasn't her fault. But at the same time, she wasn't my concern. She was Tracy's concern. In the end, I came to the decision that divorce was my only option. I couldn't accept Tracy's betrayal and disrespect, and every time I looked at the child, I saw in my imagination only Tracy and Gary making love. I returned home to find Tracy sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the contents of a large manila envelope spread out in front of her. She was snuffling and crying. "I'll probably order some food. Pepperoni pizza and breadsticks, okay?" I said softly, entering the room. "Is that what you're worried about dinner?" She hissed at me. Her tone was full of venom. "You don't love me anymore?" I sighed heavily, took a cup of coffee, and sat down at the table. "Not as much as a few weeks ago," I replied. "You don't see or can't see that you ruined everything when you spread your legs for our best friend. Now, if I were you, I would find myself a lawyer, and I would go and tell Gary's parents that they have a granddaughter. I'm sure they'll be absolutely delighted." "You know, I don't want a divorce. I love you. I want you to calm down and think about it. Would you be better off alone?" "I doubt. Think about it, darling. That's all I was thinking about. It's not about me. The thing is, you broke our vows." "And she tore out my heart," I said. "But if you love me, isn't there forgiveness in your heart? We can get through this. We belong to each other, Bobby, you know that." I thought I knew that. But this is not one of those cases where you can just say, "I'm sorry," and everything will magically get better. 24 years in vain. My first call was to my son. I outlined the essence of Tracy's actions and the fact that the child is Gary's child. I told him that I had filed for divorce. "I hope so, Dad. This is absolute crap." What was Mom thinking? He was trying to comfort me. I could tell that he was very angry with his mother. I tried to calm him down by reminding him that despite what Tracy had done to me, I know she still loves him as much as before. He asked me what I was going to do with the baby. "Absolutely nothing. Neither financially nor emotionally. I don't have to support her or worry about her. I know that everything will be fine financially," I replied. "Help take care of your sister." Stepsister, Dad, stepsister. I didn't say anything to my parents until the day Tracy was served on the table. My father was angry at both of us, at Tracy for her betrayal, and at me for agreeing to leave Tracy alone with Gary, for any length of time. "You knew that they had something for each other many years before. I can't believe you could be so naive, even if you trusted her completely. Come on, man. You know you can't trust any other man when it comes to your woman." I had to admit that he was right. I had to fight as hard as I could to keep Tracy from being alone with Gary. That, at least, was on my conscience. Mom looked at things in a completely different way than Dad. In her opinion, I was wrong to leave Tracy and not try to make peace. "Everyone makes mistakes," she told me quietly, while Dad sat and frowned. "Mom, it would be a mistake if she slept with him once. Sleeping with him for 4 months was a conscious decision. It can hardly be called a mistake. And to sleep with him, without contraceptives, it's incomprehensible," I said. "Nevertheless, Bobby, you know that you still love her, and she will need help raising a child. This is your job, Robert. By the way, I will still consider this child my third grandson." Besides her voice, the fact that Mom called me by my official name told me that she was on Tracy's side. Dad looked at the ceiling, then back at me. He knew he would get hell from her later. I didn't call Kaylee. I thought she was probably Tracy's first call after she was served. My thought turned out to be correct when Kaylee, annoyed, called me later that day. "Uncle Gary is dead, Dad. Now she can't take it all back. Move forward. You and Mom still love each other, and now you're a kid. Be a man for Mom and Bobby G's sake," she practically ordered. Wise advice from a man who did not consider it necessary to tell his own father that her mother was cheating with another man. "For some reason, I don't feel the need to worry about what you're thinking anymore," I replied. Later, I found out that Gary's parents were shocked and delighted to learn that they had a grandson. They were upset that Tracy planned to keep the news a secret, but told her they understood her reasoning. A day later, they called me and begged me to stay with Tracy and raise Gary's daughter. They knew that we had been very close for many years and felt that I was the best person who could be a father to Gary's daughter. Thanks for the trust and the compliment, but I'm not that kind of person. I have to admit that I'm so angry at Gary and Tracy that I can't see clearly. I could almost feel Gary's parents wince when the phone went quiet. I felt bad, but not that bad. I was honest. Of course, my relatives also called. They also begged me to stay with Tracy. They admitted that what she had done was terrible and stupid, but they were sure that she still loved me and wanted to raise her child with me. I thanked them for their concern, but told them that I did not know if I would ever be able to overcome the horror and stupidity. Of course, Tracy fought for a divorce. She and her lawyer managed to get 12 joint consultations appointed. I knew I had no choice, but I wasn't going to be a piss-soaked rag during the sessions. Jocelyn McAdams, Ph.D., looked very prim and professional when I walked into her office. I guessed that she was about 10 years older than Tracy and me, and she was wearing a gray jacket over a very businesslike skirt, which I noticed when she stood up to greet me with a firm handshake. Tracy was already sitting in a chair to my right, in front of a large desk. She asked Tracy to tell her side of the story first, and since I already knew her, I think I kind of immersed myself in my own little world. I'm sure Tracy emphasized compassion and downplayed the importance of cheating. Anyway, the next thing I remember is Doc waking me up from my reverie. I assumed, as it turned out mistakenly, that I would have to tell my own version of the story. Mr. Martin, it seems to me that the power here belongs to you. You can save your marriage and your family just by being an adult man, putting aside your ego and working to get back to what you had with Tracy. Wow, I didn't expect this from a man who was supposed to be a professional. It was practically the same position that almost everyone took. I had to become a man and accept what had happened. Did I end up in an alternate universe? Wait a second, Doc. I began before she interrupted me. Doctor or Dr. McAdams, please. We will keep a professional approach here. I don't want any of you to treat me like a personal friend or ally. Do you think so, Dr. McAdams? Is this the main thing for you? It seems to me that you have already chosen a side without even listening to my story. I got up, turned around, and left. On the way home, I called my lawyer and said that he needed to find a neutral consultant. Otherwise, I would not attend further sessions. The second counselor at least listened to my story after accepting Tracy's story, but I knew I was still swimming against the tide. You've admitted that you still love your wife, Mr. Martin. Your wife still loves you very much, and now also a child. What needs to be done to rebuild the family? Dr. Lauren Event asked. First of all, we have never been a family. This is not my child. I'm not going to raise someone else's child, I replied. So it's about your ego, Dr. Event said with a more than smug expression on her thin face. I can't win with you guys, can I? I asked with more than a hint of disgust in my voice. Why is this about me at all? Let me paint a picture for you in words, and I will speak slowly so that you can catch everything. It wasn't me who deceived my spouse and broke my oath by making love to another person, and it wasn't me who gave birth to someone else's child. You should ask her why she made the choice she did, and what she thinks she can do to overcome this bad choice, if she can at all. I looked in Tracy's direction and saw that she was frowning. I saw that the consultant was trying her best to keep an impassive face. As in the old Monty Python joke, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition, and I didn't expect it. Mr. Martin, if you divorce your wife and in the future marry another woman who already has children, won't you in fact raise someone else's child? Dr. Event asked. Well, I think you get my point, Doc, but in Tracy's case, the baby was conceived when she was married to me, which I think is a pretty big difference, isn't it? She gave me a slight nod, but obviously didn't finish. But since the man in question died before the baby was born, don't we disagree? Aren't you just being petty about this? Dr. Event said. Pettiness. Pettiness is when you know that you have done wrong, but decide to lie and keep silent about it. She didn't admit anything to me until I caught her. She started to continue, but I finished. Look, Doc, this is ridiculous. Yes, I still love her. It can't just be turned off right away. But how can she say she loves me when she cheated on me, got pregnant by another, and tried to pass off the child as mine? She may love me a little, but if she loved me as much as she says she does, this wouldn't happen. It wasn't once and done, Doc. She and her lover had numerous affairs. Now she tells everyone that it was purely out of compassion. He was a close friend and he was dying. Well, if it was so compassionate, why didn't she come to me, her husband, and at least discuss this decision with me? Because she knew the answer. I would have said no, and she knew it. I understand that this is her body, and she probably thinks she can do whatever she wants with it. But as soon as we said the oath, she gave up the right to unilaterally give her body to another man, at least without discussing it and/or putting me in fame, just like I should do if I ever want to give my body to another woman, for any reason. Once we have sworn an oath to each other, we no longer act in a vacuum. It's simple, Doc. Doc sat like a patient in a coma, only with her eyes open. She tapped her finger on her tablet for a few seconds. So, do you have enough love left to take a step forward and try to become a husband and father? You say that you still have love for your wife. The child's biological father is dead. There's no reason to make a victim out of her, Dr. Avent said. A step towards? That's a good way to put it, Doc. Attack my manhood. Apply a sense of guilt. My wife and our best friend deliberately ripped out my heart, Doc. If he were alive now, I would punch him in the face. My love for her is getting weaker by the minute. A child? Unfortunately, it's not my problem. Translation: there is no chance to save this marriage. We had a second session with the consultant. I didn't say anything except hello and goodbye. Tracy whined, begged, and cried. I see that you are not going to break yourself and even think about it, Mr. Martin. I'll tell the judge that it's over between you. Thanks, Doc. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, just in time for Christmas. We lived in a state where divorce is no fault, so we split everything equally, except that Tracy was paying me for my half of the house, which was fine with me since she needed to raise a child. After Gary died, he left us most of his possessions, so Tracy had money for a house. She also received several years of alimony because I earned more than she did. Although my son was still, so to speak, in my corner, I understood that he wanted to spend Christmas with as much family as possible, which meant his mother, sister, and younger half-sister. I told him that I was not against it, and we would celebrate the New Year together. 2 days before Christmas, I stopped by my former home to drop off gifts for everyone, including my ex-wife and her child. It wasn't much for Tracy and the baby, but I didn't want to look petty in front of my kids. Tracy was surprised to see me at first when she opened the door, holding Bobby Geraldine in her arms. She looked at my 2 gift bags in surprise and hesitantly let me in. She led me into the living room where there was a Christmas tree and everything was decorated just like we always did. The only difference was that I didn't do the installation and decoration as usual. Tracy saw the look on my face as I looked at the jewelry and held back tears. How about eggnog, Bobby? And then I'll put the bags under the tree. Could you hold the baby for a minute? I wanted to be rude. I really wanted to, but I just couldn't. Hesitantly, I reached out and took the baby, her baby with Gary. I held back the bile that started to rise from my stomach when she went to get eggnog. I stood holding the child right at a distance from my body, as if she were some kind of explosive device, for about 30 seconds. Then I laid her on my right arm like a football player, as I used to do with my own children a long time ago, and sat down on a chair. Tracy came in with 2 glasses of eggnog, one for each of us, and sat on the second chair in the room, smiling at me when she saw the baby clutched to my arm. It brings back a lot of memories, Bobby. You were always so kind to the children when they were little, she said softly. Not every man is given the ability to handle children. I smiled shyly. The child was beautiful. Mostly he looked like his beautiful mother, but I could never feel comfortable with her, given the circumstances. If you don't forget, will you ever be able to truly forgive? I don't think so, although I know that many people, especially in my family, disagree with me. We had a small talk for a while. Then Tracy took 2 bags of gifts and started laying them out under the tree. When she came to the first package with the name Bobby Geraldine, she stopped and, with a cheerful expression on her face, asked, "You didn't have to turn it on, Bobby," Tracy said, and a tear rolled down her face. "Christmas is a holiday for children of all ages, baby. I couldn't leave your baby without attention." I looked down at the baby in my hand. Under favorable circumstances, she could have been mine. I felt a lump in my throat. Damn it. I couldn't hate the child even though I hated what her mother had done. I was sure that Tracy had not accidentally handed the baby over to me. Tracy choked again when she found the first package with her name on it. "Oh, Bobby. Really? You shouldn't have. I really didn't expect anything. I didn't give you anything. I'm sorry." "Don't worry about anything, Tracy. I just want you guys to have a great Christmas. You know, you can come in person. You will be welcome. We'll have more than enough food. I know the kids will be thrilled too, she said. Not this time, Trace. Maybe in a year. It's too early for my mind and heart. Tracy lowered her eyes. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was honest. My wounds were still burning. On Christmas Eve, I found myself at Barnes & Noble late at night. I was reading a new book by Clive Cussler, which I bought for myself, and drinking a mint mocha latte at a Starbucks located inside the bookstore. Looking around, I found two other losers who were also reading at Starbucks. They practically had to kick me and two other losers out when they finally shut down. I returned home to a quiet house, but I was ready. The day before, I bought a chicken salad and made toast to spread it on. Ruffles chips and Don Julio tequila completed the meal. Damn, I know how to live. On Christmas morning, I woke up with a slight hangover. 4 aspirin pills, a couple of cinnamon Pop-Tarts, and 3 cups of coffee later. I was ready for a big Christmas celebration. Only one problem. I didn't have a planned holiday. I went to my parents' house, and the 3 of us enjoyed Mom's dinner, with a baked ham and several gifts. My children gave gifts for me to my parents when they found out that I was coming for the holiday. After dinner, we enjoyed hot chocolate with mint schnapps. I must admit that memories of past Christmases, when we were a family, flashed through my head. I admitted to myself that to some extent I still loved Tracy, and I had some doubts that I had made the right move. Apparently, I wasn't the only one thinking about my past life. We hope you don't mind, Bobby, but Dad and I think Bobby Geraldine is our granddaughter, and we bought Christmas presents for her, Mom said to break the silence in the room. He's dead, Bobby. Gary is gone. The child will never recognize him. She will accept any good person as her father. We don't quite agree with what Tracy did, but to some extent, we understand that, and we still love her. You can be that good person, Bobby. You have to be such a good person. Everyone wants it, and I think you are too. You just don't know how to admit it to yourself. You think that everyone will think worse of you if you bring her back and raise the child as your own. Mom had tears in her eyes when she finished. Dad was staring at me. Could I be the only one who didn't see it? Maybe, but every time I thought that, I just knew that I would never be able to look at myself in the mirror if I did that. She cheated on me for months. She tried to cheat on me, and she had a child with another man. Her words about sleeping with Gary being compassionate sounded hollow to me. A year later, almost nothing has changed in my life. I went to work and returned home alone to my apartment. I didn't go on dates, and the number of my friends was greatly reduced. To tell you the truth, I've never had many friends. Tracy had a lot of friends, and we had a lot of friends as a couple, but both of them basically left me after the divorce. I wasn't surprised that her friends had left me, but I was surprised that almost all of our friends had left. At least I was surprised until one of these former friends explained the situation to me. It seems that Tracy told everyone that I abandoned her after the birth of the child, not to mention that the baby wasn't mine. I was sitting in the next bar, alone of course, when Carl and Susie Dimmick came in and took a table. Carl and Susie were one of those couples that I considered to be among our friends, but when I went to their table to say hello, I received a very cool reception. Susie was openly mocking me, and Carl was hardly polite. Considering that I hadn't done anything to offend them, I was furious at such a bad reception and wasn't going to leave quietly. "What have I done to you two?" I growled. "Not to us, but to Tracy," Susie hissed. "How could you just walk away from the sweetest woman in the world because she had a late baby? You suck, you know that?" "Is that what this is about?" I said, almost in shock. "How about listening to the whole story and then deciding for yourself?" They both offered me a seat, but I was too excited and just stood in front of their table. I came closer because I didn't want to scream. "So I can assume that no one has mentioned to you that the late baby you're talking about is not mine, you bastards. She lived with her ex-boyfriend and got knocked up by him, and this is his baby. He died of cancer a month after she got pregnant, and she tried to trick me into thinking it was my baby. 24 years of marriage, and that's the respect and loyalty I get. So no, I didn't leave her. She left me. Fuck her. Fuck you all. You and the horse you rode." I left 2 stunned former friends at the table. My second Christmas as a divorced guy started exactly the same way as the first one. This year, at the Losers Club at Barnes & Noble on Christmas Eve, there were 4 people. Me, another guy, and 2 women. I looked over the top of my book and assessed the women. One had curly red hair, freckles, and a pretty face, and the other... Wow, why is she here? She was beautiful, to say the least. Asian with waist-length black hair and curves hidden in a hoodie and skinny jeans. She had perfect ageless skin, and I assumed she was somewhere between 50 and 55 years old. I watched her for about a minute and then decided to go to hell. All she could do was say no. I picked up my book and latte and headed towards her. She raised her head when I came within speaking distance. "I didn't see you here last Christmas Eve. You're new to the Losers Club on Christmas Eve. I'm Bobby, the president of the club. What brings a beautiful woman to this momentous day?" She giggled at my bad joke, and it was the most adorable sound I've heard in a long time. I continued. "I know you won't believe this, but I have a second Hungry Man dinner in the freezer that I can reheat tonight if you haven't made a reservation yet." "I know we just met, but—" I gave her my best puppy dog look, hoping I remembered how to do it. "Well, I usually don't do such crazy things, but since you are the president of the club, and you say Hungry Man, yes, I agree. By the way, I'm Angel Wong. Bobby Martin, president of the club, at your service." I gave her my address and told her to meet me at 6. I left to put the dinners in the oven. Both dinners were already warming up when she arrived at 6 o'clock sharp. I had to admit to myself that maybe we were both more than a little crazy. We had dinner at the kitchen table and drank a bottle of Burgundy. I told her how I happened to be sitting at Barnes & Noble on Christmas Eve, and then she told me her story. She was 5 years older than me. She was 52 years old, and she had been divorced for 10 years after leaving an abusive husband. She and her husband had been married for 16 years, and his bullying began after 10 years and continued until he sent her to the hospital with a broken jaw. Angel was a small woman with a height of 155 centimeters and a weight of about 45 kilograms. Her ex was 157 centimeters tall and weighed about 55 kg, she said. As a child, he was often bullied, and in a stressful situation, he became loud and verbally rude. After 10 years of marriage, it turned into physical violence, but when he calmed down, he always apologized and asked for forgiveness. Like many women who have been abused, she simply could not bring herself to break up with her husband, believing that she was the cause of his cruelty. In the end, she needed a mental health counselor to convince her that she was not to blame, and when she woke up in the hospital after another argument, she realized that she had to divorce him for the sake of her physical safety. Her husband was convicted of battery and spent 2 years in prison, after which he completely disappeared from her life. They divorced while he was in prison. Fortunately, they had no children. According to her, after the divorce, Angel did not go on dates too often, and she had no relatives in this part of the country. She confessed, holding back tears, that Christmas has always been the most depressing time of the year for her. "I know it was crazy of me to agree to come here today, but I just didn't want to be alone. And how could I pass by the Hungry Man dinner?" she explained. I felt sorry for myself at Barnes & Noble, but after talking to Angel, I realized that I was still better off than many people. We sat on my couch together, drank wine, and watched several Christmas movies, starting with Dickens' version of Mr. Magoo, A Christmas Carol. I realized that there was something special about this woman when she completely agreed with my opinion that Mr. Magoo was the ultimate Scrooge. Then we watched The Grinch, and about halfway through Wonderful Life, I noticed that she had fallen asleep. She seemed to have a smile on her face, and she looked so peaceful that I took a large blanket out of the closet, covered her half, and crawled under the other half. I must have fallen asleep at some point too, but when I woke up, she and I weren't sitting side by side. I'm not sure how it happened, but when I woke up, we were lying with Angel's head on my chest and half of her body on top of mine. I wrapped one arm around her body, hugging her tightly, and the other hand slipped into her back pocket. It was snowing on TV. Strangely enough, it felt so right when I lay down and hugged Angel while she slept for about 20 more minutes. She stirred and slowly opened her eyes, looking at me in confusion. I bent my head as high as I could and kissed her gently on the nose. She wrinkled it up charmingly, and then gave me the brightest smile I've seen in the last few years. "Good morning." "What is it?" she asked timidly. "Merry Christmas," I replied, hugging her tighter. We lay together, motionless and smiling, for another 5 minutes before she finally spoke. "I've never done this before, I swear," she protested, her cheeks practically flushed. "But is it just me, or do you feel it too?" I grinned at her from ear to ear. "Yes, damn it, I feel it." She moved a couple of inches closer to me until our lips touched and we kissed passionately. We did this a few more times before we started taking off our clothes. I thought it was crazy. I just met this woman, but we felt so good together. Then I looked up and saw her looking at me, and I could tell she was practically thinking the same thing. "This may be crazy," I began, "but you don't have any plans for today, do you? Because I have everything I need for a first-class Christmas dinner. And if I'm going to go through all these difficulties, well, of course, it wouldn't hurt to have a beautiful woman sitting across the table from me." Her grin turned into a wide smile that gripped my heart. "I need to take a shower, and I didn't bring a change of clothes. I can run home for a few minutes and come right back," she said. I smiled back at her. "My shower room is big enough for two, and I'm sure I have a shirt or something that will suit you." Her almond-shaped eyes sparkled at me. "If you can stand me without makeup, I'll do it," she said. We took a shower together, and I showed her my finger skills. I found her one of my smaller sweaters, which she put on without wearing anything underneath. It went down to mid-thigh and was tight enough to watch her breasts sway and sway as she moved. "It looks good," I said as she showed me the outfit. We went to the kitchen, and I poured each of us a glass of Riesling, starting to cook. Angel sat down at the kitchen table and pulled both legs up to her, which meant that half of her ass was visible and distracting me. "So you really have nowhere to be today? Family? Nothing? What is it?" she asked. "Actually, I was invited to a big family Christmas dinner this year, but I told them I had another meeting," I replied. "My ex invites everyone to my old house. The children, my ancestors, her ancestors, Gary's ancestors. This is a setup. She will make sure that I am holding her adorable baby in my arms. All the parents will tell me that I should be a man, and she will tell me that she loves me and needs me, and we will be able to restore everything. I told her that I had another meeting, but everyone knows that I'm lying. I told her that I would try to do it for a while if I could. None of them can understand me. I wasn't lying. I don't have to apologize because Tracy cheated and screwed up. We had something special until it was gone. But if we talk about something special, how about we talk about us?" We both smiled. I went over to Angel and we kissed deeply. At that moment, I heard the sound of a key in the lock of my door, and my door opened. My son came in and called me. Angel and I froze in the middle of a kiss. "Pa, he called out just before he noticed us. He looked at us kissing, then looked down at Angel's completely naked legs and half-open ass. I think all three of us blushed. Angel quickly lowered her legs and stood behind me, which was as modest as she could look in this sweater. Jeffrey immediately turned his back on us, ostensibly to preserve Angel's modesty, although I think he was as embarrassed as she was. "Mom knows that I have a key to your house, and she asked me to come here and drag you back to the house for Christmas dinner because she was sure that you were sitting here alone and acting pathetic. Well, I think you told the truth about your new meeting, and she's... this... hardly a pity. I'm sorry if I interrupted you." "You didn't interfere with anything except my Christmas preparations," I said, perhaps a little too quickly as Angel and I exchanged confused glances at each other. "Jeffrey, I need you to turn around so I can properly introduce you to Angel, my Angel." Jeffrey reluctantly turned around and entered the kitchen. Yes, it was quite obvious that Angel was naked under the sweater, but at least she was covered up. She looked at me, sort of shrugged her shoulders, and then looked away. Jeffrey couldn't resist being a red-skinned man. He looked at Angel again, and then gave me what I would call a nod of admiration. "It was nice to meet you, Angel, and thank you for coming to my father," Jeffrey said. "I'm very pleased, Jeffrey. Your father is a great guy," Angel replied. "Yes, it seems that some family members have forgotten about it for a while," he said. "Did everyone like the gifts I brought?" I asked, changing the subject. "How did Bobby G like her gifts?" "You still have a sense, Dad. Everyone loves their stuff. The child likes the things you bought. You can't believe how much she got under the tree when all three groups of grandparents were there." "Good. All right," I replied. Then Jeffrey said he had to go. He nodded to Angel and I hugged him tightly. "New Year's Eve?" I asked. "I promise Angel will have more clothes on." "Oh yes," he replied, blushing deeply. Angel gave me a hard look after Jeffrey left. "It wasn't too awkward, was it?" "What is it?" she asked. "And what's with the New Year? Am I not invited first?" "No, not this time," I replied. "But where else is my bride? Maybe on New Year's Eve." "Pretty confident, aren't you?" "What is it?" she asked. "Be even more confident when you choose a ring tomorrow morning at Ciaro's. Will you let me go home first so I can get some clothes on?" "If you insist," I replied, trying to look disappointed. The next morning, Angel chose a 1-carat marquise diamond engagement ring. Then we went to lunch and I called my son and then my parents with the news that I was engaged. My son seemed very happy for me. My parents weren't so happy. I think they were still under the illusion that I would take Tracy back and raise her child as my own. "This is so unexpected, isn't it, dear?" my mom asked. "Are you sure you're not doing this to annoy Tracy? Do you know that she still loves you, darling?" "Mom, I'm not trying to annoy anyone. And as for Tracy still loving me, her actions speak for themselves, don't they? Tracy loves Tracy." I didn't bother to tell my daughter about it. We restored our relationship a little, but she still took her mother's side, insisting that Tracy's act was heroic and related to love. I assumed that sooner or later she would find out about it and call me to give preference to her mother over me. After more than 25 years with Tracy, my developing relationship with Angel had no logic. I couldn't explain our attraction to each other and how well she fit into my life. We could talk about anything, and it felt like we'd been together forever. I didn't believe in love at first sight, but everything told me that it was so. Angel wasn't a child either, and she seemed as overwhelmed by our instant and deep attraction as I was. At first, we spent a lot of time learning everything, but then we realized that we were sucking the life out of it, and we should just let it flow naturally. Naturally, it was good. A month later, she moved in with me, and for the next 6 months, we were rarely apart. Mom and Dad seemed to like her, even though she wasn't Tracy, but Kaylee didn't hide her dislike, I guess because she still wanted me to get back together with her mother. 6 months later, we had a small wedding. I invited both children and my parents, and Angel invited a cousin and a friend with their families. I have booked a room for a small celebration in one of my favorite restaurants. It was a great day, except Kaylee cornered me and asked why Tracy and Bobby G weren't invited, as well as my former relatives. "Because your mother is my ex-wife, and inviting her would be disrespectful to Angel. Besides, you seem to have forgotten that we're not friends. Former relatives are not invited either." Angel and Tracy finally met 2 years later when Kaylee got married. Tracy planned and hosted a great event, and I was happy to pay for everything. Angel, being a beautiful, smart, and stylish lady, stayed away from the bride's mother and her plans. The only role I played in the wedding, apart from the role of financier, was the traditional one, to walk the bride down the aisle. My heart was overflowing with pride, and my internal memory machine was working overtime. Several times I looked at Tracy and remembered how she and Kaylee were doing coloring books and baking cookies. It reminded me that things weren't bad between us. We had 24 good years. Angel understood me perfectly and hugged me as we sat in the church pew. I turned to her, and she gently pressed her lips to mine. That's when I realized I could handle the rest of the day. Angel communicated with Tracy only when it was necessary during the rehearsal dinner and the wedding, but not out of fear, but out of a sense of rightness of what was happening. Tracy, for her part, walked around looking annoyed whenever she looked in Angel's direction. I later found out that she and all 6 grandparents were convinced that she had usurped Tracy's rightful place, and that this marriage was only a short-term one. The epilogue. Our short-term marriage has just crossed the 25-year mark. Angel and I celebrated with a nice dinner and a quiet evening of lovemaking. Of course, it wasn't the wild and crazy night it could have been 15 years ago, but neither of us are children anymore. After that, we cuddled up to each other for a while, and then fell asleep in an embrace. Thinking about it, I really can't complain about how life has treated me. I had a good first marriage for 24 years. Then I came back, and for 25 years now, I have had a wonderful second marriage. My 2 children are married and have given me 3 beautiful grandchildren. Tracy has never remarried. According to my children, I think that not many men were interested in a middle-aged woman with a small child, even if she was a pretty woman. They think she had some kind of relationship along the way. Otherwise, she might have already killed someone. My children try to keep in touch with both Tracy and their stepsister. The child's 3 grandparents also tried to give her every ounce of love until they began to die of old age. My son, the only family member who spoke to me regularly after the divorce, told me that Tracy didn't even go on dates for the first 5 years after my wedding, still believing that my marriage wouldn't last long. I'm sure Angel was sorry to disappoint her.